Welcome to Dajobnik.
Shalom and welcome. I'm Israeli government spokesman Eylon Levy, and this is the first episode of the State of a Nation podcast. Here, 3 times a week, you'll find top stories, the facts about the current conflict, and an in-depth conversation that will bring you behind the scenes of the story capturing the attention and imagination of the world. Together, we'll unpack the state of our nation.
Marcus Sheff, welcome to the State of a Nation podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Before we take a deep dive, I want to ask you what it was like testifying in front of the US House on the Hill, because I'm giving TV interviews all day, but I think appearing on a panel in front of members of Congress, even I would get tongue-tied.
Well, big room and everything that you would expect with the members sitting right at the top, lots of cameras, but I think
First time testifying before Congress.
First time testifying.
Not something you do every day.
Absolutely. But I think the importance of the occasion absolutely came through. They were extraordinarily interested in what we had to say about UNRWA on both sides of the House, the Democrats and the Republicans. I feel this was a moment where we had been talking about UNRWA for so long with these individual members.
Talking specifically about education, speaking with these members of Congress behind the scenes, but
Indeed.
Now that you're sitting in front of them and you see their faces, how are they reacting? Did you feel that the testimony that you were providing, laying out evidence about incitement in UNRWA's curriculum, was shifting their opinions? I mean, could you see the cogs moving?
Without a shadow of a doubt. And I think, this was the most important thing. Clearly, both sides wanted to hear what we had to say. Clearly, both sides understood that there was a problem. But there was a shift on the Democratic side, I think it's fair to say, particularly with one member who, at the beginning was, from his opening comments, less inclined to understand that UNRWA can no longer teach. And
you were getting some pushback from which member of Congress?
I think the ranking Democratic member was pushing back at the beginning.
Which is their job,
and they need to hear the information. They need to hear the testimony. That's the whole point at the end of the day. But at the end, I believe that he entirely got it. He got this one central idea, which is that UNRWA has failed in its duty of care. Right. UNRWA can no longer...
In its duty of care with education, its duty of care with aid as well.
I think across the board, specifically for us with education, the teaching program is not fit for purpose. It is something that we had warned about, that we had talked about for so long. There was clearly an absolute recognition from this member and from the other Democrats as well, some moderate, some liberal, that this is the case and that this can no longer continue. And I think this particular thing was the most significant thing of the whole testimony.
The penny really dropped.
The penny absolutely
or the cent drops. What do they say in America?
Yes, indeed. Well, we'll go with the cent dropped. Absolutely.
Marcus, I want, in this conversation we're having, I want you to brief me about what has been going on in UNRWA's education system, how we got where we are now. I want to look a little bit ahead about what we do the day after Hamas, because we've been speaking a lot about deradicalization and the need to educate towards peace. But I want to take you back first to October 7th.
Yeah.
I want you to tell me, where were you when the massacre was unfolding? And while everyone was glued to their TV screens in horror and shock, were you also shocked by what you were seeing, having spent your professional career focusing on what was being taught inside Gaza?
We had been warning for years that if you teach young people that jihad and martyrdom are the most important meanings in life, if you teach them about violence, if you teach them to be violent, to sacrifice themselves.
And this is what UNRWA schools are doing.
This is what UNRWA schools are doing. Do not be surprised when on that particular morning we see murder, beheadings, rape, abduction of babies and the elderly.
Wait, just to be clear, park that thought, are you saying that the October 7 massacre itself was a product of the UNRWA education system? Because that's a very I mean, that's a very serious claim.
I am saying that if day after day, week after week, month after month, all the way from first grade to the highest grades, you teach young people to act violently. You teach young people that Jews and Israelis are demons. I mean, absolutely demonizing
Literally
them.
demons.
Literally, in one example, demons. Then the most terrible things can happen. Education is incredibly powerful, and we should talk about this, the power of textbooks. And so on October the 7th, I stood there.
Were you in Israel at the time?
I was in Israel. And
how did it catch you?
It caught me on a Shabbat morning at 7:30 in the morning. It caught me with my wife, who got it before me, actually crying out.
Hearing the sirens.
Crying out with the television on in front of her. And I came in and stood with her in front of the television. And I think I felt what millions of us felt all over the world when we saw those scenes. But, you know, that connective tissue between the educational program and those actions, you know, it is without a shadow of a doubt a reality. It is there. Why would you systematically incite young people from the first grade, when you teach the Arabic letter ha, for the word attack, or hujum, or the word martyr?
Sorry, just to understand, you're saying that one of the things that UNRWA is doing in these schools is teaching them the alphabet through, I mean, you know, we all know in Hebrew the song Aleph Oil Bet Ze Bait. You know, Aleph is a tent, Bet is a house. Exactly. What are they teaching in UNRWA schools?
Exactly. So if you teach a particular letter using words, the word for attack or the word for martyr, that can only be systematic, right? That can only be because you intend to radicalize generation after generation of young people. But you know what? Let's go back a stage. UNRWA teach the Palestinian Authorities school curriculum.
Right, and this is what I want to understand from you specifically. When we talk about UNRWA schools, and it's important to understand the broader context here, that we have here a UN agency that predates the UN Refugee Agency, has a very specific mandate to deal with the Palestinian refugees from the 1948 war and all of their descendants in perpetuity. According to the UN, 75% of residents of Gaza are refugees.
Right.
And so the UN is responsible for their health and education services. UNRWA is teaching them in these schools, but like, who's writing the curriculum? Is this like some diplomat in New York who's writing the curriculum for the textbooks? What are they teaching? So
really, really important question. So, I mean, first of all, the majority of schools in Gaza are UNRWA schools. So
Hamas has been in power since 2007, but it's not that Hamas controls although it's a bit more complicated.
Well, no, but your point is right. Hamas took over the Palestinian Authority schools. UNRWA have always had these majority of schools in Gaza. So, by the way, if there were 3,000 terrorists that came over the border on October the 7th, you don't have to be the world's greatest statistician to assume that the majority of them went to UNRWA schools, were UNRWA graduates. The others went to...
That is horrific.
Right.
That's really horrific.
And a fact. And the others went to...
At least half of...
At least half.
Well, I mean, when the alternative was going to Hamas schools, I don't know what's worse.
Well, it is neither better nor worse, because Hamas teach exactly the same curriculum, as does the Palestinian Authority.
What is this curriculum? There are UNRWA schools. These are textbooks that are written by some Swedish diplomat in New York. Right. I mean, what is the material?
So these are textbooks written in Ramallah by the Palestinian Authority. They are taught to 1.3 million Palestinian school children, both in or three of Palestinian Authority schools, which are majoritatively in the West Bank. UNRWA have the minority of schools in the West Bank. They are taught in UNRWA schools in both the West Bank and in Gaza, and Hamas as well, teaching the same curriculum. By the way, indicative to us that Hamas never had a problem with the Palestinian Authority's curriculum. They had so many problems with so much in relation to the PA, but the Palestinian Authority's curriculum was clearly radical enough, was clearly extreme enough to pass muster for Hamas's educational system.
That's fascinating. I'd always assumed that Hamas had taken over in 2007 and then instituted its own radical education system, but you're saying they're quite happy taking the same textbooks
Absolutely.
that are being taught in.
Absolutely. There is, they did have extracurricular material. I would love to be able to say this is the past tense.
The child soldier boot camps, unfortunately,
Absolutely.
that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. And UNRWA, by the way, also have extracurricular material. It is just as bad as the original Palestinian Authority material.
So wait, I want to understand, why is, before we get onto what is actually in these textbooks, I'm trying to understand the landscape of the education that the UN is providing to children in Gaza. Why are they using Palestinian Authority textbooks? I mean, the UN operates all around the world. It's on the ground in Yemen. I mean, is the UN teaching with like Houthi pirate textbooks in Yemen?
What an important comment. No. They do not. The UN does not teach the Houthi curriculum in those schools which it has in Yemen. Now,
good.
Well, quite
good.
Quite, but it is proof that you do not have to teach, as they say, the host nation curriculum. There is this idea that the UN has to teach the curriculum of the place where they are. It's not written in stone. It's not even written in United Nations protocols. It is a best practice, no more than that. Now, I think we can all take it as read that everything in this curriculum cannot ever be a best practice. It is the worst possible practice. So not only could UNRWA have changed the curriculum, but UN organizations, as you say, elsewhere in the world, and Yemen is a perfect example, have done this in the past. UNRWA made a choice.
UNRWA made a choice, and we're far enough into the podcast now that we've been, dunking on UNRWA and saying that it's been teaching a terrible curriculum that's been inciting to violence. What are they actually teaching? I mean, take me into an UNRWA classroom. Little Palestinian children are arriving in Hamas-controlled Gaza. Like, how does the day start? Do they swear allegiance to the flag? What is being taught? What is so bad about these textbooks? So, how bad is it really?
Okay, so I think in order to understand it, one needs to understand the strategy. And the strategy is originally a Palestinian Authority one. When the Middle East was in the process of beginning to change their school curricula, which was kind of around about 2014 and moving onwards to today.
What do you mean when the Middle East was changing its curriculum?
Countries in MENA who began to improve their school curricula. And happy to talk about those.
This is a shift that we've seen since 2014.
A shift in the Sunni Muslim world, a very positive one.
What is driving that shift?
Each country is shifting for its own reasons. Saudi Arabia has eliminated practically all the anti-Semitism in its school curriculum.
Really?
Absolutely. And, the violent jihad is out, homophobia is out.
Really?
Really significant changes.
That's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary, and it is absolutely a part of Vision 2030 of MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, wanting a different Saudi Arabia.
A plan to try to modernize Saudi Arabia, and they've made incredible strides as well in recent years. But as this trend is happening in the Middle East, and I do want to dive back into that later, what is happening within the Palestinian Authority?
So they went in completely the opposite direction. They had their own big reform in 2014 to 2016. Grades 1 to 4 rolled out in 2016. 5 to 10, 2017, and the Tawjihi, the matriculation grades in the last 2 years, they were significantly worse than the textbooks that came before.
We have a few examples here.
Sure.
Just talk me through what we're seeing here.
Happy to do that.
Here we have a few examples from UNRWA textbooks. This is from a report of yours of Impact SE from last year.
Okay.
What are we seeing here? Suicide bombings are glorified, as is cutting the necks of the enemy?
Well, I think this is so desperate and awful because everything that we know about October the 7th. It is a story about resistance, about cutting necks, and about wearing explosive belts, the fadayin.
This is used in order to teach what subject?
Language.
This is language.
Arabic language, grade 8.
Grade 8 UN schools. These are UN employees who are teaching children Arabic language through stories about the daggers of the fedayeen that fell on the necks and suicide vests.
Yeah. Now think about October the 7th and recall the connective tissue between what they were studying and what they did.
Prophetic. What else do we have? We have another example over here that comes from a different subject matter, calculus, taught by counting martyrs and suicide bombers. What do we have here?
So,
and again, let's remember this is a curriculum that is taught grade 4 by UN staff.
By UN staff. And I think the key idea here is this is mathematics. If you are going to use teaching mathematics, teaching addition to grade 4, to 10, 11-year-olds through the idea of martyrdom, if you are going to insert...
What is actually happening in this exercise? What are they being
So
taught?
they're essentially being asked how many martyrs died in the first intifada, martyrs being terrorists who blew up shopping malls. How many in the second intifada? How many do you get? Not apples or oranges or that which we are used to.
I mean, this seems almost like cartoonishly.
It is.
Cartoonishly evil.
It is. It is cartoonishly evil, but it is also coldly strategic because, you know, the slipping in every opportunity of an extremist idea, I think
it's a form of subliminal messaging.
It is. And it's certainly subliminal messaging, and it goes to the idea of the radicalization, the purposeful radicalization of a whole generation.
And it's not just what is taught, but also what is not taught. Here we have something that actually we had an example within the textbooks of a unit on previous peace negotiations with Israel, and then what happened to those chapters.
Absolutely. So, you know, I think, again...
Those chapters are removed.
Extraordinarily important. Any idea of peacemaking was taken out. There was practically nothing left except a mention of the Oslo Accords where they Dr. Arafat's letter to Rabin, which talks about cooperation. So, again, the bit they left in, they purposefully took out an idea of cooperation so that children might not get the idea that it's possible to cooperate with Israelis.
The idea of teaching calculus through counting suicide bombers or teaching Arabic language through stories about suicide bombers is, of course, horrific. And then I've got to ask you, and I'm sure you're getting this question a lot from the lawmakers you're speaking to, is this merely anecdotal? I mean, have you just gone through these reports and found a couple of bad apples, so to speak, like really bad apples? Or is this something more pervasive within the textbooks?
It's pervasive. It suffuses the curriculum across all grades.
Do you have other favorite examples? I use favorite in a cynical sense.
I do. I understand. Indeed. You know, I think, to me, the most coldly terrifying idea is telling young people that essentially dying is better than living. There is an exercise where they are told that a death through martyrdom is better than a life lived well, essentially. And as a parent, as somebody who runs a research institute looking at peace and tolerance in education so that we can have better societies of the future, you know, that idea absolutely, it terrifies me.
I mean, it's deeply sad because when we look at what is happening right now in the Gaza Strip with the evolution of the war and the suffering that is experienced by civilians there, you can't avoid the thought about the way that these children who are suffering now as a result of the war that Hamas declared and has chosen to fight from behind and underneath civilian areas have also been brutalized over the years. But it's not just brutalized by Hamas, and it's not brutalized by 17 years of Hamas rule. It's brutalized by the Palestinian Authority and with the complicity of the United Nations, which is extremely sad and bleak. How do officials respond when you talk to them? Foreign leaders, lawmakers, you present these examples to them and you say, look what is happening with your money. Look how they are stealing the future from these children, stealing the future of people in Israel as well, because they raise them up on this radical diet. How do they respond when you tell them where their tax dollars are going?
Right. You know, I think there was a pre-October the 7th and after October the 7th. Before October the 7th, there was genuine concern to shock by policymakers, lawmakers, the countries who were donating to UNRWA.
There was genuine concern and shock.
There absolutely was.
And yet the US remained the largest donor to UNRWA, something like a quarter of its budget. So now it's true that a few years ago under the Trump administration, the State Department had said that that UNRWA was, I think, irredeemably flawed, was the phrase. But it didn't shake them into action.
It did not, because I think for most reasonable, decent people, the idea that that kind of education could produce the horrors of October the 7th might have been just too much for them to be able to reach to. And so they reached for other things instead. There were year after year resolutions in the European Parliament condemning the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA for teaching this hate curriculum.
But that's interesting.
Yes.
So you're saying that foreign countries that have been donating to UNRWA have been aware for a long time, have been condemning it,
right,
but didn't actually connect the dots and think about the practical implications of what this sort of education was, what was actually being done with their money.
I think that's true. Again, absolute shock. I've heard lawmakers stand up in the European Parliament, one after the other, centre left, centre right, and say, I would not allow my children to be taught this. Why are we paying for this? Decent people, good people. The European Commission actually froze well over 100 million euro to the Palestinian Authority for 13 months so that the curriculum would be changed. The Palestinian Authority did not change the curriculum.
But is there any sort of follow-up? I mean, they're giving money. There is an expectation of certain standards.
Right.
So how does the European Union or the US State Department, how do they react when they say, look, we're expecting certain standards, you need to stop teaching incitement? They don't.
Right.
So why is there no accountability? Why is there no oversight?
Indeed. I think for the Palestinian Authority, they just, essentially said, we're not going to do anything about this. We're not going to change our curriculum. Frankly, you cannot make us. You want to freeze your money, freeze your money. And in fact, the European Union...
They've said that as bluntly as that?
Pretty much. I mean, Steyer stood up the Palestinian Prime Minister stood up in a cabinet meeting and said, you can, cut off our water and our energy before we will change our school curriculum. Actually said that.
Really?
Palestinian Prime Minister, yes.
Which is extraordinary, because I found the same thing happening with UNRWA as well. And Philippe Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, who, of course, feigned shock about the 13 UNRWA staff members who were involved in the October 7 massacre. Pull the other one. You've been warning them for long enough.
Right.
But feigning shock about that at the same time as refusing an invitation to testify before the US House. So you have both UNRWA and the Palestinian Authority demanding this continued flow of international taxpayer money while dodging any sort of accountability or scrutiny.
And by the way, education is the majority of UNRWA's budget. That is, the biggest chunk. So imagine you're the US and giving, $360 million a year, then, you're talking about probably close to 200 million of that going to this insightful educational system.
And that's interesting that you say how much money is going into education, because one of the problems we're dealing with now is the question of how aid is going to be distributed inside the Gaza Strip, and UNRWA claiming that it is an indispensable mechanism of aid delivery. And one of the things we've been doing as Israel is coming and saying, UNRWA is not an aid distribution agency. It's a welfare agency that provides education, park that thought to one side, social services, healthcare to the Palestinians. It is not the sort of agency that does emergency relief in conflict zones at scale. And we think the Palestinians in Gaza will be better served by aid agencies whose budget is all about delivering humanitarian aid instead of this kind of education. Park that thought, back to one side. Let's talk about the education.
Right. I mean, not my area of expertise at all, but my understanding is exactly that. Their failure in education is clearly something that we are discussing. But yes, they cannot do the kind of crisis management which other UN organizations can do as well.
But it does claim that it is at least doing a good job on education. So I'm wondering, just in terms of teaching kids how to read, teaching kids how to write. Okay, they're teaching them to count through counting suicide bombers. But at the end of the day, is UNRWA meeting those standards in teaching them to count? I mean, like, are these exercises where they're teaching them to read through suicide bombers, helping them to read, helping them to count? What can we say in terms of the objective standards of taking these people and actually giving them an education?
Right. So I think there is absolutely a connection, and there's quite a lot of research pointing to the fact that radical extremist education also fails pedagogically. I
think we have an example here from an UNRWA. I always say that when people talk about poverty in the Gaza Strip, terrorist regimes have never been very good for the free market and middle-class capitalism. But here you have, what are we seeing here of UNRWA's own reports about its own educational achievements?
So as I recall this report, it's UNRWA's report from 2022, essentially admitting to their failing grades.
Here we see a definite downward trend.
Absolutely.
In core educational parameters.
Absolutely, which goes against actually one of the claims of the World Bank, which is we have to continue supporting them because they are doing so well in education.
But according to UNRWA's own reports,
they are not.
They're failing the kids.
Exactly.
I wonder, Marcus, we talk a lot about the textbooks and the bad examples in their incitement. Do the textbooks actually matter? Because I think back to my own education, and I know that my liberal education in London is probably nothing like what children are getting in a so-called refugee camp in Gaza. But I don't remember thinking that I was particularly influenced by the textbooks.
And I'm sure you were not. The Middle East is entirely different in relation to...
I mean, the subliminal messages in the Cambridge Latin course were probably a little bit different
as we were discussing. Right. But the Middle East is different. You get one book, one grade, one subject. Outside of Israel, which is very much the Western model, more like the European than the American model.
Teachers prepare their own materials.
But
here it's more centralized.
It is absolutely centralized. So again, one book, one grade, one subject. They're kind of about that thick. They look like a magazine. Students, pupils write inside of the books often. They are changed every year, actually twice a year, because it tends to be 2 semesters. So every single...
Wait, I want to understand. You're saying these textbooks are changing. It's not that this is a textbook from 10 years ago. And despite the criticism from the State Department and the European Union, these textbooks are being replaced, but not being replaced to get rid of the nasty stuff that the donors are insisting they get rid of as a condition for the aid?
It is much easier than people think or know to change the current Palestinian school curriculum. 230 books, about 80 pages, that thick. They are reprinted, as I said, each semester. So that's 2 semesters. It's a matter of switching PDFs with material which doesn't incite to jihad, to martyrdom, to, frankly, cutting throats, which does not use examples of counting martyrs, but, apples and pears. This is something which can be done within, frankly, a few months. And this has always been the case. And this is what we have been saying to policymakers and lawmakers for years and years. UNRWA does not have to teach this curriculum because they actually print themselves the PA curriculum. They just don't change it. So you switch a few PDFs, you get a graphic designer in, you get some teachers to put in neutral values, or God help us, values of peace and tolerance, you can have a completely new curriculum. UNRWA refused.
Are you noticing since October 7th, not only with your testimony on the Hill, but conversations with other policymakers, that the pennies dropped and there is a desire to insist as a condition for funding that the curriculum be changed? This isn't just a question of a few bad apples who participated in the October 7 massacre. It's not just that 10% of UNRWA members are paid Hamas or Islamic Jihad operatives. It's not just that 50% of them have a first-degree relative who is a Hamas or Islamic Jihad operative. The whole educational infrastructure is rotten. Are you hearing more receptiveness?
I absolutely think that is the case, and that is certainly the US, and that is certainly Europe. And when we think of the day after, I don't think the day after is that far away.
But we'll get to the day after. I want to understand first the day now, which is Hamas's involvement in those schools, which is, we're saying it's the Palestinian Authority curriculum that's being taught by the United Nations. But Hamas has been in power in the Gaza Strip since 2007.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, do they just give these UNRWA schools total educational autonomy, saying, we trust the PA curriculum is radical enough, good luck? Or is Hamas meddling in some other way in the UNRWA school curriculum?
I think we found that Hamas is meddling in many ways in UNRWA schools.
How?
Again, not
apart from hiding rockets in the wind tunnel shafts, which we know about ad nauseam.
And absolutely. So, that is absolutely what I am referring to. I think we know about teacher after teacher that had been members of Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
We know about undergraduate after graduate who Hamas celebrated as martyrs over the years. And so, that is
not
something.
Least the terrorists who participated in the Black September terrorists behind the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre, perhaps the most famous example of terrorists who are direct products of the quote-unquote refugee camps.
Absolutely. And a long list which Hamas memorialized on their website of their own martyrs. The same curriculum in Hamas schools, in PA schools and UNRWA schools, so Hamas did not really need to, mess too much with that. But if you don't, I just want to go back to, the question you raised about the authoritative nature of textbooks and how for you that wasn't so much the case. They are incredibly authoritative in the Middle East because, as I said, there is just the one of them, because teachers don't have wiggle room. They don't bring in their own material. They are civil servants in authoritarian places who know that they teach what they're expected to teach if they know what's good for them. They come with teacher guides, each textbook, so they know exactly what to teach. And students, pupils in the Middle East are highly aware that what they are receiving is a set of values, a national identity, which is being passed down to them by the rulers, for which there is a great deal of respect, sometimes fear, but a real understanding that these textbooks, this is the narrative. This is the national narrative. This is who we are expected to be as adults. And that, works for good or for bad. It works appallingly badly for the PA. It works extremely well now for the UAE, Saudi, other countries that we can talk about.
And I'm glad you raised that, because we have seen an extraordinary shift in attitudes in the Gulf in recent years with the normalization accords, with Israel, the willingness to put this conflict behind, realize there was no rational or logical reason for these countries to have a conflict with Israel, embrace it, have peace. What are you seeing in those countries? And does that give you any hope for de-radicalization in the... We started this conversation saying UNRWA schools, but it's actually Palestinian Authority education system.
Exactly. So the answer is I still have enormous hope about peace and tolerance in the MENA region, watching these educational reforms. And not just watching, but we are very much participating in it, working with governments. Don't obviously need to go into too much detail there. But, imagine the Saudi Arabian curriculum, which was the bugbear of the State Department after 9/11 for years and years. And they did everything that they could do to get these changes. These changes didn't happen until 2019, and then they happened in the most dramatic way. The United Arab Emirates... You're
saying we'd be better off if they started teaching the Saudi curriculum in the Gaza Strip?
I am saying exactly that. I'm saying take examples from the Saudi, United Arab Emirates, Moroccan, Egyptian curriculum up to grade 6, which is where their reform has gone to, so you don't want to go further than that yet. Yes, there are remarkable examples there. Islamic education taught in a peaceful, embracing way. The Abrahamic faiths embrace, the other embrace, respect for the other, for the individual other, peacemaking as a way to resolve conflict, that are taught in across subjects. Again, United Arab Emirates, from Islamic studies to language to literature to what they call the moral education syllabus, which is just fantastic. And actually, I can say that we have a joint venture with the United Arab Emirates Ministry of Education. Yes, you can lift great chunks of that, transfer it, and,
But in order to do that, an active decision had to be made on the part of the leaders, and that's why I'm wondering, one of the questions I get is, you can't defeat Hamas. Hamas is an idea. And I say, okay, we know that we can't defeat an idea. We can remove it from power. We can destroy its military infrastructure. de-radicalization the day after Hamas is going to require the involvement of the international community. But if these UNRWA textbooks are in fact just Palestinian Authority textbooks, it means that in order to de-radicalize Gaza, and I'm having this dawning, sinking realization right now,
got to go for PA.
It's not enough, actually, just for the UN to say we need to teach a better curriculum. It's going to require an opt-in from the Palestinian Authority and an active decision that it wants to jettison what is basically the core of the Palestinian national movement, which is the violent rejection of the state of Israel in any borders whatsoever. And I'm not sure that we're seeing that willingness now.
I entirely agree with you. But I would say that, worst case analysis, if you do make those changes to those textbooks in Gaza, that is not nothing. I do not entirely accept the idea that you cannot beat ideology. Hitler, when elected, changed all the textbooks in Germany. By 1939, he had the kind of cadre that he needed to join the Einsatzgruppen and commit the most horrific acts. After the war, the Germans entirely changed their educational system. They changed their textbooks, and a de-radicalization process occurred there. Now, these things are possible. These things are possible in Gaza. They're possible for all
If it
Palestinian
happened in Nazi
schools.
Germany, it can happen in Hamas, Gaza. Marcus, I know you like your job at Impact SE, and you're doing really very important work. I want to give you a promotion. If I were to give you a promotion, which is not in my power to give, but if I were to give you a promotion to UN Under Secretary General for Education Affairs, and we say it's the day after Hamas, the Hamas government has been dismantled, Israel has achieved total victory in Gaza, the hostages, please God, are released, those who are still alive, those who are not, released home to their family for burial. You are now in charge of designing the education infrastructure in Gaza because the UN has decided to atone for its sins and make sure that the next generation is brought up on peace and reconciliation. How would you begin going about that challenge?
So first of all, absolutely a demotion. I adore my job and I would hate that job. But
well, if duty calls.
If duty calls, not rocket science. The first thing that you need to do...
And rocket science is also something they teach in UNRWA schools.
Absolutely.
As we find, yes.
Absolutely. Frank, sadly, yes.
Pun intended.
Pun intended. The changing of the curriculum can be done, as I said, in a matter of weeks. And that would be in that imaginary role. The first thing that I would get done, and it wouldn't take that many people, that much money to get it done. As I said, UNRWA is reprinting those books anyhow, essentially taking the PA curriculum, putting their own cover on it. So,
do you see any prospects for switching PDFs within UNRWA at the moment, or do you think that in order to switch the PDFs, you just need to erase this awful agency and start anew with a new organization that hasn't been co-opted by, cooperating with, and in cahoots with terrorists for all its existence?
So I think, again, as a research institute focusing on peace and tolerance in education, UNRWA has entirely failed. It's failed in its duty of care. It's failed in every mission that it had to care for young people. I cannot see a universe that UNRWA can continue to be teaching. And by the way, that's in the West Bank as well. Those schools celebrated the attacks. UNRWA schools in the West Bank celebrated.
What do you mean they celebrated?
A UNRWA school had a big assembly where they read poetry praising the attacks of October the 7th in the West Bank.
That is horrific.
And actually opened the textbooks to show examples of how they should be inspired by what is in the textbooks. So, we got to remember that UNRWA goes beyond Gaza. But in, a universe where one had that kind of control, I would say whoever is in charge of education in Gaza the day after, first, immediate and perfectly doable step, change the textbooks, switch the PDFs, reprint them. The material actually exists. The moderate
Do
material
you see a role
exists.
for neighboring states, Gulf countries, in helping the Palestinians adapt their curriculum in terms of offering a more tolerant version of Islam?
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Have you been speaking to them about?
Just let me. I think what I will say is that remarkable people in the UAE, for example, Ministry of Education, who spend an enormous amount of time working out how to use UNESCO benchmarks of peace and tolerance together with wasatiyah, with Islamic Arabic ideas of peace and tolerance, which actually pretty much fit together nicely in the educational field. They could be incredibly useful in this. There are folks in ministries of education all over the Middle East who could be incredibly useful in this. This is their day-to-day. This is their bread and butter. And this is a problem with UNRWA. They have always made this out to be impossible. And we have our checks and balances. And, for years we went through these discussions at State Department, European Commission and other places where we went through UNRWA's checks and balances and showed how they do not work, how there is no accountability, no transparency, how they are teaching
an active desire to avoid scrutiny as well.
An active desire to avoid scrutiny. When we asked UNRWA and others asked UNRWA, okay, we get it. You have a whole set of active measures to prevent the teaching of hate. Show it to us. Show us what you tell teachers to do. It never
And they have nothing to show.
And the United States government showed this as well. In 2019, with their accountability report, they showed that UNRWA does not in fact do what it says it does and tells teachers theoretically not to teach the bad bits. However that was supposed to work. Nobody ever understood it in the first place.
And unfortunately, we see that same pattern of UNRWA's avoidance of scrutiny and oversight, not only with education, but also with its failure delivering aid in Gaza, deflecting blame onto Israel, of course, scapegoating it as a way to cover up its failure. Marcus, this has been really interesting. I'm on the one hand thinking this is so much worse than I thought, because it's not a question of bad UNRWA schools. It's the whole Palestinian Authority. But on the other hand, optimistic that if de-radicalization could happen in neighboring countries, the neighboring countries that we expect to play a major role the day after Hamas, then maybe that is a positive influence that can be brought to bear.
100%.
Marcus Sheff, CEO of Impact SC, and maybe one day UN Undersecretary General for Educational Affairs. Well, if there's any hope the day after Hamas. Marcus Sheff, thank you very much for coming on State of a Nation.
Such a pleasure.
Thank
you, my friend.
Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Until next time, stay informed and inspired. This is Dejobnik signing off.